transition to our second author, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Vanita Agarwal, whose research theorizes ecologically aware, relational, and dialogic understanding of whole person care and health promotions, disease prevention, and chronic illness management. Her research has been published in journals such as Health Communication, the Journal of Patient Experience, Qualitative Health Research, Journal of Advanced Nursing, and the Journal of American College Health. She's an associate editor at Frontiers in Communication and has received top paper recognition from the Applied Communication Division of the National Communication Association. Her monograph, Medical Humanism, Chronic Illness and the Body in Pain and Ecological Wholeness, integrates her meditation practice, native knowledge, and professional training in Vipassana meditation and Ayurvedic diet and wellness. Even as life expectancies increase, growing number of people are living with chronic illness and pain. Long-term self-management of chronic conditions involve negotiating the intersections of personal life choices, community and workplace structures, and family roles. This book proposes an ecological model of wholeness. So thank you so much, Dr. Agarwal.
Thank you for having me, and I'm really glad to be here and talk a little bit about the book. So I'm going to share my screen and try and pull up the PowerPoint. Just a note ahead that I'm going to have a little bit of a thought exercise going on in here. So if you have a pen and paper handy, that might help. Okay, give me a second. Okay, so this presentation is an exploration of what it means to be whole. And by whole, I mean not simply healthy, not how to heal, not how to practice self-care, or how to recover from illness that has taken a hold in our bodies. It's an inquiry into what is lost when we focus on just being healthy, or on preventing disease, or on recovery from pain. While all these are important, the book argues they are mechanisms en route to fully being who we are. Our sense of purpose, our ability to harmonize and reconcile disruptions, and our ability to sustain fulfillment and alignment with our environment. Having said that, the book itself centers its attention on those who are managing chronic pain and describes practices for living with chronic pain in fulfilling ways. It looks at how relationships and our healthful practices, whether these be playing sports, music, practicing yoga, hiking, meditating, or going for long runs, can reshape our relationship with ourselves, our bodies, and our environment. It draws upon my work with those living with chronic pain and illness, and those helping them address it through complementary and alternative medicine practices. I'm grateful to all those who have been a part of this journey through the years it has been in the making. What does it mean to be whole? To be whole is to be aware, open, and integrated in our relationship with the self and others, with diverse human cultures and plant and animal species, and with the geological ecosystems that construct our planet. In this vast conceptual landscape, wholeness is achieved through openness to revising definitions of humanism, to rethinking how we position the self with the body, and to recognizing alternative ways of organizing knowledge, human experience, and relationships. Living with chronic illness is disruptive to one's sense of self, one's relationship with others, and one's ability to participate in the lived environment. Those with chronic illness often seek to manage their care through the support of therapeutic providers, and often find practices like massage or chiropractic or acupuncture helpful. For each of us, those who are healthy, those whose bodies are in transition or recovery, or those managing illness, our efforts to maintain well-being are part of the same journey. In our time today, I'll present an ecological model of wholeness, where the individual, the ecosocial environment, the principles of nature as experienced through time and evolution, and culturally based traditional health practices come together in a dialogic framework. Central to wholeness is a recognition of the self. An informed awareness of the self, or who we are, is a cornerstone of the concept of self-reflexivity. The premise of self-reflexivity, drawn from the symbolic interactionism perspective, states, we come to know who and what we are through interaction with others. Reflexivity asks one to understand that meaning does not reside in an objectively defined world and is made through social and experiential understandings in the context of time, culture, and values. Being self-reflexive is to cultivate an awareness of one's identity through reflection. Self-reflexivity employs the interaction of language, perception, and meaning-making in continually constructing an awareness of ourselves in daily life. It is based on the assumption that the individual and the world are engaged in a co-constitutive relationship. Today afternoon, I'd like to take us on a contemplative journey of imagination, reflection, and intention. So if you have a sheet of paper and pen, please take it out. And we'll also use the chat box if you want. A little jotting space for about 10 words is all we'll need today. So to begin, imagine the innermost you. What comes to mind? Shape, color, attribute. Write it at the bottom of your paper, right? Write at the bottom and don't take more than 2 seconds to do that. You can share it in the chat box if you like. Now, it doesn't have to make sense. Just put down what is your most spontaneous response. So when you think about you, what's the word that comes to mind? In practice, the notion of self-reflexive awareness can be understood as giving full attention to a physiological or cognitive experience. Experiences such as disease, illness, and healing benefit from cultivating self-reflexivity in the monitoring of body sensations, reactions, and the nonverbal meaning-making hidden in physiological perceptions. So the language of the body can be used as a means of communication to be aware of the self. The experiential sense of who we are is anchored in the body. The monitoring exercise that you just did suggested that in the cultivation of self-reflexivity, reflects the ways the body inscribes our experiences and knowledges. Embodiment is defined as a representation or expression of an idea or quality through the body. As World notes, we both have and are the body. The embodied self experiences healing as a connection of intentionality with its authentic expression through the body. Here, healing is the sense of wholeness that is felt when the self, the body, and the environment are working in alignment with each other. This sense of wholeness is disrupted in the chronic pain experience, when our sense of self seems disconnected from the body. In cultivating an embodied subjectivity, imagination is related in meaningful ways with representation of bodily objects and sensations to evoke intentionality. This form of intentional meaning-making relates the internal to the external and the subjective experience with the objective experience. So now, in an earlier slide, you had imagined the self, and you had written one word right at the bottom of that page, and in the chat box, I hope you wrote. I can't see the chat box while I'm here on this page. Now imagine the body that your self has, not in terms of shape and looks, but how it feels. So that's really important. Just try and think of what that body feels like. Can you just write down one word that describes how it feels? And please write it in the chat box too, if you like. It could be hot, cold, anything that spontaneously comes to mind. If you're comfortable, do share it in the chat box. What practices enable us to cultivate the embodied sense of self in an intentional manner? I argue that by re-examining the humanities and their relationship with human purpose, we can understand their intimate relationship with our health and well-being beyond a sense of human purpose and fulfillment. For example, art offers the potential of exploring experiences that are symbolically represented in and by the body, such as freedom, power, and imagination. By representing the human body as an aesthetic form, healing can be imagined in an exploration of freedom of potentiality and the exercise of constructing it through the hands of the individual themselves. Likewise, community, rituals, and belonging offer ways of attributing relational significance to individual actions of health responsibility. In very practical terms, these might look like vaccination decisions. Recognizing the body through a relational framework emphasizes how vulnerability and change intersect with everyday experiences to support well-being. Taking the body self-axis as the subject, so we just thought about the self, and now we're talking about the body. I argue that individual experiences and their construction of the chronic pain experience can be reshaped towards productive outcomes. So we look at the discursive body now. Intersubjective awareness, or awareness of another's subjectivity in a co-constituted space, offers acceptance of body conditions and the ability to change. Being open to a discursive construction of the body is closely connected with the idea of being vulnerable to change as a choice. The vulnerable self includes the possibility of the self that is open to change through choice and agency. Imagine the body that the innermost you has, not in terms of how it feels, but how you might describe it now. So in the first one, you looked at it in terms of how it felt. Now I'm asking you to describe it. So if you were to describe your body, not the feeling of the body, but how would you describe it now? What is one word that would describe what your body is like? You could write it in the chat box or on that page. Chat box would be helpful if everyone would like to share it over there. That's nice. Fully embodying the idea of the ethic of vulnerability as an open self empowers the individual to examine the discursive body, subjective change, and healing to transform chronic pain and the illness bodily experiences. Practices such as journaling as a narrative exploration provide the support of guiding individuals to being intentionally vulnerable to a multiplicity of discursive interpretations. The material physical body is arguably the earliest site of our experiences. It is the site of inscription of our lived knowledges, meaning making, and relationships. I now consider the material body through its communicative representations constructs risk, disease conditions, and its changing physiological composition. The healthy body, the body in transition, and the diseased body are the stages of the body reflecting the public health categories of primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention. Each is characterized with its own unique vulnerabilities and avenues for health promotion, disease prevention, biomedical intervention, and clinical treatment. When we are faced with a deteriorating body or a body in pain, disruption, or disease, we are forced to listen to our body's often strange voice, speaking with us all the time, interrupting what we're doing, and forcing us to revise our well-thought-out life plans. So let's think about our material physical body for a moment. Think about how it looks like in a mirror. What does it look like when you look at yourself in the mirror? Write it on top of your last word and share it in the chat box too, if you can. How do we cultivate a material body that is in alignment with our inner self and the embodied self and the discursive body, especially when the material body is going its own way during times of disease, speaking a strange language of pain and illness through its myriad debilitating symptoms? Research has shown how mind-body practices such as dance allow individuals to express themselves and communicate empathy. Notably, these studies show that they do so while relating the intersectionality of the material body with the embodied self. Once we have examined the alignment of our inner self and the body, we can examine our relationship with the context. So we are ourself and the body, and now I'm looking at the context here. The ecological model of wholeness looks at the context through the layers of time, change and illness intrusion, traditional health practices, and food, nature, and our eco-social planetary body. First, in order to understand our relationship with time with healing, we delve into how time and its related attribute of change affects our perception of who we are. A significant amount of research has examined how self-concept in its relationship with illness identity and illness intrusion can help us explain how people perceive and live with illness and disease. Self-concept theory explains how the sense of self is continuously affected by one's experiences in different ways under varying conditions. I examine how self-concept in relationship with the notion of subjective time can help us understand the body self-disruption brought about by those living with chronic illnesses and involved in management of their long-term challenges. Chronic illnesses provide an illustrative case for understanding the adaptive challenges that disrupt the individual's sense of self and self-narratives in debilitating ways. So you had the axis of body and self. In the top left corner now, you have the focus on movement and stillness, which comes through time. So write down one thing that has changed in your body, one thing that has remained the same since you were born. Okay, and hopefully if you like, you would also share it in the chat box. I'm not giving it too much time, so I'm hoping you be very spontaneous about this if you're doing this exercise. Although the very individual and unique nature of living with chronic conditions challenges the individual to see themselves beyond being a body in pain, by connecting the body self-access with the contextual layers of the environment, individuals can shift the perception of pain and its relationship with time. So Buber's notion of the I and thou, me and you, illustrates how music and mind-body practices like yoga, for instance, in their contemplative function can cultivate stability in the present. Those living with chronic conditions and their comorbidities are often challenged to anchor themselves in the present and to be open to their environment. In these practices, we acknowledge that anchoring the chronic illness experience in the changing present is a continual act of embodying change in the body. So positioned within time, the next layer teases apart the meanings of silence, solitude, and available presence. I assert that the work of healing is intimately associated with the ability to be internally quiet, still, and contemplative in dynamic and active engagement with our context. As elemental and primal that a state of solitude may seem, it is anything but. Undertaken with guidance and training, solitude provides us with a way to connect with and sustain a sense of wholeness. However, if not practiced carefully, silence and solitude can be very punitive, disruptive, and harmful. And so you have to be practicing it under a careful, guided manner. Intentional, communicative, and body self-silence, cultivated with the goal of creating an open discursive space of relationality, provides a mechanism for creating agency and illuminating spaces of personal expansion without the use of words. Such silence can enable individuals to reintegrate the body in pain and situate themselves in their lives in a productive manner. So look at the top right corner and look at the body again. This time, close your eyes and hear your body. How does your body sound? If you had to put a sound-like word for it, what would it look like? And jot it down on the paper if you can. So silence is one of the earliest pre-cultural phenomena that guides how we as individuals perceive and make sense of another's intentions, words, and actions. Intentionally cultivated silence is a powerful and important means of focusing dialogic engagement with another in deliberate ways. In a final look at context, I look at food, nature, and the environment. Food sustains life. While we are aware of the global challenge to the universal availability of food or access to food, we remain oblivious to the fundamental taken for granted premise of our right to food. We don't question that. Beyond the constraints of food access, availability, and affordability, we don't question our position with food in or as compromising our body self in a communicative and dialogic manner. So let's examine the assumption and relationships embedded in our practices of production and consumption of food. Our relationship with food in contemporary times is shaped by mediated and social influences. These influences range from sociocultural disruptions, representations, and concern with appearances that warp our primal relationship with food. It is these maladjustments that are manifest, for instance, in nutrition and metabolic disorders, and a host of chronic conditions, including obesity and the comorbid stressors underlying cancers that disrupt our body-self relationship. So I examine the assumptions that are embedded in these practices of production and consumption of food. Think about the last food item you consumed. What was it? Was it a snack before you came here for this talk? Is it something you're eating right now? Were you hungry when you consumed it? Where did it come from? What were its qualities? So look at the bottom right side of the box of the slide here. And imagine that part of food as now being a part of you. Which of those qualities do you see in yourself from that food? Can you take a moment, take a little moment and write it down, thinking back to the last piece of food you ate. And it's not you don't have to think too much. So just a quick jotting in a few seconds is all it requires. Approaching our individual relationship with food invokes the need to take a deeper look at how we understand food and its role in our lives on the one hand, and how we make meaning of health, healing, and wholeness on the other. From a critical perspective, Shiva extends the knowledge of food as a relationship argument to the evocative question of our responsibility to other species. She asks, do the boundaries between species have integrity? Or are these boundaries mere constructs that should be broken for human convenience? Her call to transgress boundaries questions the assumptions of who is being protected, by what actions, and how these affect the freedom of those connected in this cycle. The basic argument is that we are all in this planet connected, and in some ways we make each other. The sustainability argument put forward by Eden advocates thinking beyond anthropocentric concerns in sustainability to include the health and well-being of other creatures, recognizing that we are all related. These anthropomorphic arguments center food with the health of all. In food, we find health of all is the central idea here, in both psychological and physical ways, to propose an interconnected approach for all elements as one organism. So by now you should hopefully have had a page full of written words. But before I move to that, I'd like to offer my thanks to all the institutional support that I've received for doing this book, and without which it would have not been possible. So let me stop share. And I do see some of you wrote in the chat. I wasn't sure because I couldn't see. Now, this exercise, if we went through it a little bit more carefully for each of your pages, would have been something where where you would take a look at every one of our pages and design your own ways of reconnecting back to yourself and put yourself in alignment with the environment based on some of the practices we saw. So all of these practices can be individually tailored to what we eat, who we think we are, what kind of pain and disease conditions we're going through, and how we can adjust to the environment. That's for another day. But I'm glad for your presence here and for all of you for following along and being patient with this exercise. And thank you for contributing.
Thank you so much.